Well, hey everybody, it's Hudson. I've got all my photo bags kind of exploded out here, and I'm doing that last minute crunch, figuring out what's gonna make it, what's not gonna make it into my bags for a trip I'm flying out to tomorrow when this video launches. I'll be on a plane with the family, kiteboarding gear, camera gear down to Baja, and I'll try to bring you guys along in future approaching the scenes. But for this week, I'm gonna just run a video that I did in my advanced panorama training course on finding the no parallax point. That video has been available as a free download in my store, but I just want to throw it up here, and I'll put a link to the course down below. It's going to help you find that point. A lot of people call it the nodal point, not necessarily quite accurate, but the no parallax point, where if you get your lens back over the axis of rotation, it'll eliminate parallax, where the objects close and distance appear to be moving in relation to each other. And it's going to help you align more advanced panoramic captures a little bit better. Once that's over, I'll jump back in. I'll take a few of your questions. I had some really great questions over the last week come up on the YouTube feed. I'll talk just a little bit more about my trip and some other upcoming trips. I got a really exciting one to Cuba coming up pretty soon too, so stay tuned. All right, so in this lesson, we're gonna do one of the most important things you have to do before capturing advanced panoramas. We're gonna find that magic place that we need to set the lens over the axis of rotation in your tripod in order to get rid of parallax, to get rid of that appearance of close objects moving in relation to distance objects in the background. And before I jump into a really simple technique for doing that and the tools that you're going to need to be able to accomplish it, I want to talk just a minute about terminology because it gets really confusing. I'm going to call it the no parallax point, and that's a pretty frequently modernly referred to method of calling this thing that we're looking for the no parallax point. Describes it perfectly. It's that point that we set the lens over the tripod where it gets rid of parallax. You're going to hear a lot of people refer to it as the nodal point. That's not necessarily perfectly accurate. It's actually finding the entrance pupil of your lens. And if you want to delve into depth about that stuff, you can look it up online. There's a lot of discussion. Doesn't really matter at all for our purposes. I'm going to call it the no parallax point, the entrance pupil. Nodal point's not technically correct, but again, just really doesn't matter. It's that point that gets rid of parallax in our scene, that appearance of close objects moving in relation to distant objects. We don't need very much to accomplish this, except a couple of things. We need a good steady tripod that you can get nice and level on, a panning clamp, and I'm gonna give you guys links to the tools that I use in this course. This one's by Really Right Stuff. There are some ones made by more affordable manufacturers. The Really Right Stuff one is my favorite, particularly with this little quick clamp. We're gonna need what's generally referred to as a nodal slider, because for years most people referred to this as the nodal point until the engineers kind of corrected it as entrance pupil, and then we've gone to the no parallax point. So they generally still call these nodal sliders. This is a Kirk one that I really, really love because I can switch its orientation of the clamp on the rail. I'll show you how all this stuff works in a second. So a really stable tripod, and whether you're using a ball head or you're like me and you like using a fluid head, you know, generally most of us in the photography game at this level where you wanted to do advanced panos, still photographers tend to use these Arca Swiss compatible clamps. So whether it's on the top of your ball head, whether it's on the top of your fluid head, my suggestion is that you clamp one of these panning clamps into that clamp that you normally clamp your camera into. And that's gonna let us get this thing perfectly level. Here with my fluid head, I've got a bubble level right here. I've already leveled it. I'm gonna look at the bubble level on top just to make sure that that level is perfectly level. Clamp it, and now with everything locked down except this panning clamp, I'm level as I rotate this clamp, perfectly level. The next thing I do is I take the nodal slider and I'm gonna open that clamp and put the nodal slider in it. And you know, for starters, I'll put it just as if I was basically right on top of the tripod to show you what the parallax looks like. And then you're simply gonna clamp your camera into that nodal rail. The neat thing about the nodal rail is that if I open this clamp a bit, I can slide forward and back, and you see how I'm rotating the camera through with the lens at different positions over the center of rotation. So that's the whole trick. That's what a nodal slider does for you. It helps you find that no parallax point. And the position that you want to be in, we're up here on this parking structure, partially because we have all of these nice vertical lines out in the distance at what is definitely infinity from the camera. The other thing you need is a vertical line that's close to the camera that you can observe as it moves in relation to those vertical lines in the background. So here I've got just a light stand with a bit of pink gaff tape wrapped around the tip to make it just kind of stand out from the buildings as I pan the camera. And you could use anything. You can use a fence post, you can use a post on the porch of your house, and then a building in the distance. There's almost anything that's vertical that definitely stands out and has some contrast from the background is going to work for these purposes. My general trick is a light stand with some pink tape on it, and I go someplace where I've got vertical lines in the distance. This parking structure's perfect for it. So the great thing about our modern digital cameras, whether you're using mirrorless or whether you're using a DSLR, is that we've got the live view on the backs, and you can even zoom into it. So if I activate this live view on the back of my camera, and I know a lot of you are saying, he's got his camera horizontal. Generally, Hudson talks about putting the camera vertical to capture most panoramic captures. Well, I agree with that, except for this purpose where having the aspect ratio wide just gives you a little bit more room to see that line as it's moving on the live view. So for those of you like me with slightly older eyes, I'm starting to have a little problem focusing at close distances. I'm going to get my reading glasses on. So right now, without even moving my live view, I can see that that light stand that's close to me is moving in relation to the background. You know, and you're going to want to be focused on that close vertical object that you're using to measure that movement, that parallax movement. It depends sort of how distant you want to be from it, whether you're using a wide angle or a longer lens. Think about what you might set in a panoramic capture. You know, with a wide angle lens, you can have things really close to you and things distant from you, all in focus at the same time. So you want to have that pretty close, and wide angle lenses are going to be even the most important to get this parallax point correctly, the no parallax point, because there's so much distortion. It matters a little bit more with a wide angle than with a normal or a longer lens. So right now, as I said, I can see that it's moving in relation to the background without even zooming in on my live view. So I'm just going to slide, keep my clamp open a little bit and slide that nodal slider back a little bit. That movement's getting a little bit better. I slide it back a little bit more. That movement's getting a little bit less, and I can zoom in just one level. I don't want to zoom all the way, because if I zoom all the way, I'm not going to see the light stand in enough of the frame. I still want to have a kind of a wide field of view, but I want to be able to see whether it's moving in relation to the background. And I'm just manually sliding the camera back. Ooh, there's a lot less motion now. A little bit more. Less yet, a little bit more. Wow, almost no motion. I'm going to slide in a little bit more. And at this point, I can zoom in another level because there's less motion, and it's going to amplify it a little bit. And you're just going to get to the point where there's no motion as you move through the frame. Right now, that looks good to me, and I'm just going to lock that panning clamp, turn it around, and have a look at what my marking here is on this. And to me, I see that it's at 80 millimeters on this particular nodal slider. So I'll get out my phone and I'll take a note that for this particular lens, which is a prime 20 millimeter Nikon f1.8 lens, that 80 millimeters on my nodal slider is the correct no parallax point. And I keep a little on my phone Dropbox document. It's a PDF file that's available for offline access on Dropbox. That's my method with all of my lenses and their parallax points listed. I don't have every single one memorized. You know, I think it's important to know that if I was going to do a longer lens, if I was going to do, say, a 105 millimeter lens, I would have that light stand, you know, 30, 40, even 100 feet away from me, because it's very unlikely that I'm going to do a long lens panorama that has a close object like that. Everything would just be completely out of focus, and it wouldn't matter whether there was parallax or not. So because the longer lens tends to have less depth of field, you're gonna have objects that might be closer than infinity that are actually quite a ways away from you. Let's say 50 to 100 feet away from you. So you're gonna be a different distance from this light stand to check this with a longer lens. With the wide angle lens, nice up close like this, you'll just have to shift it around to get where you're seeing the motion that you want. And think about, with the particular lens that you're using, how close would you have an object to the camera? I think the last big point is that if you're doing this with zoom lenses, each and every focal length is going to have a different parallax point on almost all zoom lenses. There's a few exceptions I've found where it stays pretty consistent, but the elements are moving around inside the lens, and that generally causes the entrance pupil of the lens to be shifting with that zoom. So my technique for that is, let's say you have Nikon's 14 to 24 millimeter lens. It has markings at 14 millimeters, at 16 millimeters, at 18 millimeters, and at 24 millimeters. I'll just measure it at each of those points, and I make sure if I'm going to do panoramas, I figure out the composition that I want, and let's say it's at 18 millimeters, I'll consult what that 18 millimeter no parallax point is on my document. So for a prime lens like this, you find the parallax point and you're done. For a zoom lens, you're going to want to set it at specific set points that you can go back to, which are usually marked on the barrel of your lens, and check and note the no parallax point for each one of those focal lengths as possible. That's essentially the entire process. It's not hard to do wherever you are. I've used a fence post and a distant building in Patagonia when I lost access to my phone. My phone battery was dead and I needed to check quick before doing an important panorama. I mean, there's always the possibility of just using any two vertical objects where you can change how close you are to the close one and have one out there at infinity to find the parallax point. And we'll talk more about different equipment that we're going to use for advanced panoramas for multiple rows and for angling the camera up and down and still keeping that rotation level in the next video. We're going to talk about sort of the tripod setup for advanced panoramas. But this is what I would use to check and find your nodal point. Camera horizontal on just a simple nodal slider with a panning clamp. And I'll put links to that equipment once again out there for you guys. All right, cool. So I hope that helped some of you that have been struggling a little bit with getting panoramas with close subjects and different distant subjects to line up properly. It's a real simple process, finding that nodal point, calibrating your lenses. In my advanced pano training course, I go over that. I go over some tips and tricks for capturing more advanced panos and HDR panos, multi-row panos, panos where you're having to look down on a subject. I go over a bunch of gear that can actually save you money over buying, dedicated pano capture kits. I've got some lighter weight, cheaper equipment that does a fantastic job. Panoramas have been a passion of mine for a really long time. So I hope you'll check out the course. It's down below, linked in the YouTube description. So again, one thing that approaching the scene for me, I really want this video series. It's every Thursday. For those of you that haven't been watching, I really want it to be a conversation. I want you guys to join in, ask questions. Last week I did a video about calibrating your monitor to get better quality prints, to avoid those dark, kind of muddy looking prints. And I had a lot of really great questions come in as a response. And I want to take just a couple of those right now. So David Arthur asked me, please address the management of the ambient light in the room when doing hardware calibration. Because I have windows in my room, I want to calibrate in the evening, which is when I'm more likely to do editing. I also hang a black curtain in the doorway to keep the glare off the monitor screen, which is opposite the doorway. Your thoughts are appreciated. So, I have obviously I work in a studio here where I've really controlled lighting. I've got curtains and blackout screens over all the windows that I can shut down. There's no direct sunlight coming in on my monitor. We have real controlled studio lighting conditions in here. I work with a couple other people too. And so it's I calibrate for the same conditions I have in here all the time, but that hasn't always been the case. Before I built this studio on my property here in Portland, I have a big old farmhouse that's just across the yard from me here. And up on the third floor, I had kind of a back bedroom, and I hung a blackout curtain over the window in there, painted the walls all gray, and I would just dim the lights when I worked on my photos. And I did a lot of printing in there. I have my Hewlett-Packard Z3200. That was my first larger format 24-inch roll feed printer. It was up in that room. And so I just kind of created a dungeon for myself in a back room with the window covered. I don't have the need for that in here because I can just easily open and close the windows, and I've got good studio lighting. I don't worry about calibrating for ambient lighting. The i1 Display Pro has a mode where you can leave it plugged in, connected to your computer with a little cover over the photospectrometer. There's a kind of a locking little cover that keeps it protected, but it reads ambient light through it. And that, it can actually keep the monitor up and down for the light that it's reading in the room. I'm going to highly, highly recommend that you set up a little bit of a dungeon system for your editing. I know it's not the greatest, but I think the worst situations you can have are where your monitor screen is facing a window, that light's coming in and creating glare on your monitor, and just changing the brightness of your monitor. It's going to be really hard for you to see how bright shadows and highlights really are in that condition. Another really bad situation is when your monitor screen is up in front of a big window. I know it's lovely to sit at your desk and look out the window, but if you've got strong backlight coming in over the top of the monitor, it's going to really mess up the way that your eyes are seeing the screen. Probably one of the best situations I ever had editing was back when I was working as an attorney. I had another house not far from here in Portland, and that one I set up the basement as a photo editing studio. And it literally had this one little basement level window that no light came in, and I again painted that room gray, and it literally got almost no light that I couldn't control in there. So I think that just strategically locating your editing monitor, even if you're on a laptop. When I'm in a hotel, I close the curtains when I'm editing. I don't really ever edit on the airplane unless everyone's asleep and all the blinds are down. So it's just, those thoughts about not having glare on the screen, not having a lot of backlight. And that's all I really worry about for monitoring. I had another great question. Julie Boyle said, "Have a great trip, Hudson." I announced that I was going to take off for Baja last week, and she said, "Take us, do some videos on the vacation if you possibly can. I'd love to see what you're up to." Well, I intend, this is a big project. Whenever I go on a trip and I'm taking photography gear, it's a project. But when I take the family and when I'm going kiteboarding, it's like almost like, I was in the military before I was in college, before I was a lawyer. I was in the original Gulf War. And, it literally reminds me of sort of a coordinated assault. Like, it takes so much planning. We're taking kites. We're taking, stuff for the kids. We're taking photographic equipment and everything that we need for 9 days, because we're really sort of staying self-contained in a house on a beach a ways away from any stores or anything. So it's a heavy lift, and I'll take you along because it's actually quite a project, and I rely heavily on my wife and on my kiteboarding friends on a trip like this to get us there with all the gear and get settled. So it's going to be a fun time. We'll see what happens, but I'll definitely be doing some recording along the way. So look forward to that. I had another person, Bruce, asked, "What are your next trips? What are you looking forward to?" Well, so obviously, when you watch this video, if you watch it soon after it's launched, I'm going to be in Baja for the next 9 days. Sorry for everyone in the polar vortex. I do feel a lot of sympathy. That looks ridiculously cold. But I'm going to be down in sunny Sea of Cortez. When I get back, I've got about a month here, well, most of a month, and then I drive the big Sprinter van El Jefe down to Death Valley. I have just a few spots left in that workshop if anybody wants to join up. With the government reopened, I know that all of the restrooms are going to be pumped and the trash is going to be cleaned up. The park was never closed, so that workshop has been a go nonstop, but it's going to be a lot more comfortable. Even if they close the government a week before it gets there, things should be relatively clean, and the hotel is still operating and the park is open, so that's going to be a fun trip. Then I have South Carolina coming at the end of March, and that's going to be a fantastic workshop. We hold that in Old Town Charleston, but we do a ton of birds and wildlife work in this old cypress knee swamp that has miles of boardwalk that the Audubon Society owns, with just tons of bird life. And we go to the South Carolina Raptor Rehabilitation Center, and they fly birds for us and let us photograph all these amazing owls and raptors close up. And we go around the old town, and we go to some old plantation gardens and photograph fountains and night street scenes and eat amazing Charleston food, and generally have a great time geeking out on all things photographic, from birds and wildlife to to travel photography. And then I'm going to meet up with my family in Cuba because I'm really strongly considering a 2020 photo workshop to Cuba. And so I don't ever like to run a workshop where I haven't been, and I'm going to go. I've got some friends and family that run travel to Cuba, so I'm going to go down there, kind of coordinate what would be great to photograph, check it out, and then look forward to a potential 2020 Cuba workshop. So that's sort of the beginning of my season. And then I'm going to be doing Cannon Beach, Northern Oregon coast, spectacular workshop. I can't even remember. I think that's in late April. So stay tuned. Look through the workshop. There's links to all that stuff in the YouTube description. But I've got a lot of fun travel coming up, and I look forward to bringing everyone along. So thanks so much. Again, I'm Hudson Henry. If you've watched it to this point, hopefully you liked it enough to click like and click subscribe and share it with your friends. And I'll see you next week.